Chapter 16, The Civil War, Section 5, The Tide of War Turns. We're going to talk about two battles first off. The first one is Fredericksburg. Abraham Lincoln was so tired of McClellan and his lack of aggression that he replaced McClellan with a guy named General Ambrose Burnside. We'll get back to him in a minute, but he was sent to attack Richmond by the way of the town of Fredericksburg, which is outside of Richmond. Burnside did the opposite of what McClellan did. He went full speed ahead to attack Lee at Fredericksburg. But first, they had to cross this river, and the Rappahannock River, and it took a while to get across that river. And that allowed Lee to regroup because Lee had split his troops in half, and he was worried about that. So being stuck on the river allowed Lee to regroup and entrench his troops. The Union finally made it into Fredericksburg, but they suffered heavy casualties, over 12,000 casualties, where the Confederates only lost 5,000, and the Union and Ambrose Burnside were forced to retreat. Now here's a little quiz. Ambrose Burnside popularized a famous hairdo. Can anyone figure it out just by looking at this picture? Do 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 do. Sideburns. Nice, right? Ambrose Burnside, sideburns. There you go. Burnside is going to step down after Fredericksburg. Lincoln will replace him with General Joseph Hooker, and he will be sent back to Fredericksburg. So Hooker is sent to Fredericksburg to outflank the Confederates. Now, Hooker is going to send his flanking position to the side. When you flank someone, you are going to attack from the enemy's side. Instead of attacking like he was supposed to, he hesitated and took a defensive position at the town of Chancellorsville, which is right outside of Fredericksburg. Lee and Stonewall Jackson were able to basically split the Union troops in half, and they overwhelmed the Union forces, and the Confederates win. But the unfortunate thing for the Confederates is that Stonewall Jackson will be killed by his own men during Chancellorsville. Robert E. Lee is going to launch some more attacks in Union territory. Now, his goal is to break the spirit of the North, break their will to fight. He also hoped that a big victory in the North would convince foreign countries to recognize the Confederacy. Now, he is going to attack a place called Gettysburg, which is north in Pennsylvania. It was the largest and bloodiest battle of the Civil War. More than 51,000 soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured, or missing in the three-day battle. This is combined Union and Confederacy. The Union will win the war, if you can say killing 51,000 people a victory, but it was an important victory for the Union because it stopped Lee's plan of invading the North. The Battle of Gettysburg was a three-day battle. On the first day of battle, Lee tried to prevent the Union from establishing a defensive position on some hills in Gettysburg, like, for example, Cemetery Hill. Unfortunately, due to some delays, the Union were able to create that defensive line on Cemetery Hill. On the second day, the goal was to attack the Union soldiers from the side and capture a hill called Little Round Top. If they were to capture Little Round Top, then they would be on the higher point of the battlefield, and they would fire down on the Union soldiers, and that would signify maybe a victory. Unfortunately, the Union soldiers were able to hold off the Confederate attack, and the Confederates abandoned the idea of capturing Little Round Top, and they will also not be able to capture Cemetery Hill. On the third day of the battle, Lee planned an attack on the center of the Union line. By attacking the center, he hoped to split the Union troops in half and be able to defeat them, because if you're not whole, if you're split in half, you're not as strong. He entrusts his own general, George Pickett, to attack the center of the line. So he will take 15,000 men and attack the center of the line. This became known as Pickett's Charge. And as they attempt to take the center of the line, the Union stood strong and withheld the attack. And George Pickett's attempt to break the center of the line failed at Cemetery Ridge. George Pickett lost his life as well as most of his men. After the loss, Robert E. Lee will retreat from the north and head back to Virginia. The Battle of Gettysburg was the turning point of the war. It was the turning point because Lee will never again try to attack the north. He'll be in retreat. The Battle of Gettysburg happens the day before the victory at Vicksburg. With those two battles, it felt like the Union could not lose at this particular point. And, worst off for the Confederacy, Britain and France refused to help the South after the Battle of Gettysburg. On November 19th, 1863, Abraham Lincoln will give a speech called the Gettysburg Address at a dedication of the Gettysburg Battlefield Cemetery. He praised the bravery of Union soldiers and renewed his commitment to winning the war. After his success at Vicksburg, Lincoln put Grant in charge of all Union forces, and he will fight a series of battles with Robert E. Lee called the Wilderness Campaign. These battles were designed to capture Richmond in 1864, but for the most part they were unsuccessful. As you're looking at this map, I know it's kind of blurry, but you can see where Grant and Lee met up with battles, constantly going forward towards Richmond. Abraham Lincoln needed a big victory from the Union Army to help him win re-election in 1864. Now, Grant and one of his generals, William Tecumseh Sherman, who you see in the picture, they believed in something called total war. The plan would lead a campaign into the South to destroy all railroads, industries, and farms that would help the Confederacy in war. So Sherman starts his march to the ocean, or the sea as it's called, by starting in Tennessee in early 1864, and eventually will make his way to Atlanta, where he basically burns down the city of Atlanta, Georgia, and then he makes his way to Savannah, Georgia, which is right on the Atlantic Ocean, by the end of the year. This is called Sherman's March to the Sea. And in the whole process, he destroyed all railroads, industries, farms, anything that would help the Confederacy. It was destroyed by Sherman. Again, Sherman practiced a policy called total war, which was started by Grant to destroy all civilian and economic resources in the hope of ruining the South's economy and ending its ability to fight. Grant pretty much had Lee surrounded by April of 1865. Now, Lee had hoped to join up with some other Confederates in North Carolina, but were stopped by the Union. Lee tried to make some small attempts to break through the lines, but they were unsuccessful. They tried to break through Confederate defenses, or Grant broke through Confederate defenses at Petersburg, Virginia, and Robert E. Lee will be forced to retreat to Richmond. Now, Lee is completely surrounded at this point, and that's when Lee decides to surrender to Ulysses S. Grant at a small little town called Appomattox Courthouse. Now, don't get this mixed up with this building right here in this picture. That's not really a courthouse. The town is called Appomattox Courthouse. It's not because they surrendered in a courthouse. This is not a courthouse. This is actually some guy's house. But the surrender took place in that house on April 9th, 1865, officially ending the Civil War. The Civil War had deep and long-lasting effects. Almost 620,000 Americans were killed. Slavery ended. Former slaves were now homeless and jobless. The Southern economy was in ruins. Tremendous amount of hostility between North and South even after the war. And many questioned how the United States could be united once again. This ends Section 5.